The wacky world of MultimediaJay.
Well now, I think I know the reason now why I was getting rubber band lag in Legion. Another automatic update. I remember the good old days of Windows 7 where you could have something ding when updates were available and pick when you wanted to download them. This one's for you, Microsoft. Bringing the worst of corporate IT to the consumer world. It's something that Satya Nadella's Microsoft doesn't seem to understand. The simple idea that people own the computers they buy. So they want to be able to choose how they run them, not have the worst of corporate IT network policy brought to the consumer level. Oh, and by the way, if you want to bring in if we want to bring corporate IT to the consumer level and have unavoidable patches, is Microsoft going to assume liability if a forced patch F's up a system? Things that make you go, Yes, in many ways. I mentioned Satya Nadella's Microsoft specifically because the Microsoft that we see nowadays is a very big ringer for the Microsoft of the 90s. It landed in all that trouble because of the antitrust stuff with Internet Explorer and whatever. So anyways, even if those updates weren't going on, I would still have something to do over here. So, I was going on about yesterday, oh well, I guess I'm not gonna have much for tech video content because I built Monolith. And then the whole time I was playing Legion, even without the Windows updates downloading in the background, the idea of doing something with the silver bullet was just gnawing away at me like I had to try this. So we already know that this computer still works and that I just didn't have it plugged in correctly last go-round. We also know that the wiring inside is a complete and total rat's nest. And how interesting that this case has a window to show off your components, but zero cable management, so it shows off your spaghetti instead. The early 2000s. Yeah, it was a different world back then, when you were building computers in the early part of the last decade. Whatever. Oh, look, I can see the reflection of the TV, is it? Or is it the stuff off to the side? Who cares? Actually, no, that big thing is the TV. Let's get off to an angle again. Crashing into stuff, darn it. Because there's no room. I gotta move some of these totes of stuff and do the great sift and put all the summer stuff away. We'll do that later, though. We already know this machine will run Linux, but I want to try something a little bit different. I've been seeing some older retro tinkerer channels, or older computer retro tinkerer channels, so to speak, taking machines and building nostalgia rigs, like Windows XP gaming rigs. Apparently it's kind of a geek challenge to try to run Windows XP in this day and age, and this thing is spec'd specifically for XP, and I have some copies of XP sitting around that aren't doing anything. Let's see if I can pull that off, despite the system being 2 years past end of support and all that lovely stuff. What can you still do with Windows XP nowadays, I wonder? Thing has 4 gigs of RAM. We'll see what the 32-bit limitations do to it, and just how incompatible things have gotten in more recent years. First things first, though, we gotta clean up the spaghetti in there. We know the system works, but it could be laid out a little bit better, especially the fan controller. Forget it. Just forget it. I killed any chance of cable management when I decided to get a fan controller with cables going every which way. I have to take the other side of the case off in order to have any chance of keeping all this ketchup and mustard where it needs to be. And quite frankly, this Core 2 Duo system is just not worth putting that much effort, time, blood, sweat, and tears, whatever, into. Hopefully everything's plugged back in and it'll start back up. You know what? Does this thing have 4 things for the motherboard? I should just use the motherboard to control the fans. Monolith's still chugging away in the background, so I can change the source on the television and have some fun here. We've started going backwards here, turning back the clock. We'll begin with validating that Windows 7 will not properly install on either here or Tuxedo at the same time because of the OEM license. So, ruling that possibility out, which will force us to go back to XP before we try Linux again, just to see what it's like to run XP in 2016. Let's begin the install. The drive has just been nuked. There we go. Now we're installing Windows off that Windows 7 disk, which I'm sure isn't going to work, because it's already registered to Tuxedo's hardware. This is just to illustrate that no, you can't do this, because I did hear some folks talk about, well, I upgraded to Windows 10 and I was able to reinstall my original Windows 7 on another machine afterwards. For science! Or something. What the hell is this? I think we're switching to Tuxedo right now to see if the license for Windows 10 on that machine has been invalidated. What the... This is very, very bizarre. Tuxedo works too. No idea. Maybe Windows 7 is kind of being on its way out. It's kind of legacy status at this point. Very, very, very bizarre. Well then, what kind of gaming performance can I squeeze out of that Core 2 Duo? Unfortunately, some of the problems I've had probably have something to do with the RAM, the cheap Kingston crap that I got earlier. Yeah, I might have to swap out the RAM in that system. Max the board, see what it can do. The console killer out of an old Core 2 Duo system? Food for thought. Very, very weird. Very interesting. Well, the theme for the Silver Bullet is to run what's left of it into the ground. So that's what we'll do. Windows license included for this old copy of Windows 7. Strange, strange, strange. So in light of the weird stuff that's been going on with this computer, I decided to wait 24 hours before doing any more experimenting with it, but I did manage to install Unigine Valley, and let's take a look and see how it's running here. Keep in mind that Monolith can max this out in Extreme HD mode, so 20 frames a second minimum on the busier scenes, but it can approach 60 under the right conditions. I muted the sound because it would come out through the TV speakers and sound horrible. The key difference here is that this is on low mode. I've turned things down a lot and I've got the performance, the texture filtering on something like performance. Yeah, another long day at work. Lovely. Now here's the interesting part. You know, you hear people talk about console killer machines, but what about getting up to a decent playable frame rate with cheap hardware on low mode? There are some games out there, Skyrim kind of set a standard for this, but there are some games out there that look okay on low mode, and playing games on low mode can actually be better than the consoles, because you got consoles out there still struggling with 1080p in the first place. Well, this is 1080, and it's in low mode. Now, all we have to do really is change the source to switch back to Monolith with its i7 Skylake and see it maxing everything out, being smooth as butter, locking at 60 FPS, because I have adaptive VSync turned on to not show anything above and beyond what the TV can show. Looks a lot better. I mean, this looks kind of like a next-gen console versus... This is definitely far beyond next-gen console versus change the source back to computer number 3 here. And now we're back to low mode. You can see jaggies and there's actual stuttering and things like that. So depending on the game, I guess, we probably could squeeze some kind of performance out of this Core 2 Duo. I'm also curious about a few other things too. Like, for example, replacing the thermal material on the stock cooler with Arctic Silver. What's that gonna do in terms of lower temperatures with the same not HSF, but the same cooler? Could I potentially play around with some of the overclocking on the motherboard for this that's been on there. I just never used it. It's called CIA on this old board, whose last BIOS update was in 2009. Yeah, we're hovering around the 30 frame per second mark if we're lucky. Sometimes 20 in the busier scenes. So definitely comes up short. A better use for this computer would be some kind of server or something like that running Linux. Oh, look at that. Oh, that's bad. Stutter, stutter, stutter. Now, where are we at on Monolith's Unigine Valley? Oh, yeah. Big rain scene at 45 frames a second with a ton of stuff going on the screen. A much newer hardware, much better results. And all that lovely stuff. Now it's back to capping around 60 again. So, what to do with this machine? That is the question. I'm curious what games it'll run if I use it as a console replacement, but the console killer that I want to set up is actually Tuxedo. This one is just me going nuts here. The actual console replacement machine that I want to set up is Tuxedo. But considering we're, 60 frames per second on the old computer, but this is in low mode, so something to consider. Get the frames up to 60 by any means necessary, because at least it'll be 1080 in some way, shape, or form. Then turn up the eye candy. I understand some people do that the other way, though. They get the eye candy and they're like, 20 frames a second, oh well, at least it looks good. Stutter, 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 stutter. I tried switching back to DirectX 9, but it's not really helping things much. This Core 2 Duo is just struggling. This is kind of like my Greenham gaming computer at this point. Look at all the stop and go. It's almost like therapy to switch back to Monolith and see everything all buttery smooth with all the eye candy all the way up. Look at that. Nice. 60, 60. Now that's the way it's meant to be played.
Yay, video kiss shop. You're on Team Green. Why don't you give Team Red a chance?
This evening scene looks really nice. 50, actually dipping below 60 FPS. But I think the adaptive VSync affects things in that department. Long day, man. Actually, long 2 days with this kind of stuff. Because it's supposed to be the machine turning VSync on and off as needed. And right now it's needed. But sometimes the calculations might be a little wonky. Look at that. You can almost reach into the computer and touch the tree. The interesting part about Unigine Valley is there's a free roam mode, so if there's a scene you particularly like, you can stop the demo and go run around in the valley. It's kind of like Skyrim without any gameplay. Meanwhile, on old Clunko-matic over here, don't want to see old Clunky, don't want to confuse people with, have people confuse this thing with the furnace. Ugh, yuck. Unigine Tropics would actually be a more contemporary benchmark for this thing. This is just bad. It can hit 30 sometimes, but I guess the big rule here is computers should not be running games that are newer than their hardware as a rule of thumb. You gotta build stuff that can handle, oh, there we go, there's that tree scene again, there's still jaggies on everything, and it's struggling, but as a rule of thumb, computers, you start having to be careful when something's newer than the hardware on your computer. So you built a system in like 2008, games up to 2008 should be okay, at least with what I build, but anything that is newer, no, forget it. Oh, look at all the stop and go on this poor thing. Alright, I gotta stop torturing this Core 2 Duo. But yeah, you consider the Nova Bench scores. This thing scores 240, while the Phenom 2 that I upgraded to with its extra cores and extra speed in 2010 got up to 570. And now, I can't look at this anymore. Monolith, please, save the day! And it's mirroring the two displays too. Then you go to this, where the processor is close to 1,000 points in Nova Bench. Oh, nice and scenic. Nice. Even when the weather picks up, it still looks nice and playable. Brilliant. So we awkwardly use the mouse to shut this thing down. It's had a good run, definitely, that's for sure. But what happens to this machine next is, I don't know. anyone's guess at this point. Tuxedo is actually going to be the... I'd like Tuxedo to actually be the console replacement. This thing, however, can be just a wonky old experiment. And not much else. I mean, look at how outdated the power supply is. It doesn't cut the power to the USB, so this mouse is still a bright blue light even when the thing's turned off. Oh well, what are you gonna do? Except switch back to Monolith that is still running Unigine Valley, smooth as butter. Look at... Oh, it goes dark right immediately after I start it back up. Place looks so nice. You almost wish you could be there. Except for the stormy bits. Alright, that's enough playing around with this worn out old piece of junk that's getting run into the ground. Don't know what to do with it next though. We could try the Steam library on it. But for some of the tougher games, like Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed, Sega products, that would have to go over onto Dailymotion. Something I need to think about and figure out. Till next time, this is MultimediaJay, signing off. Thanks for stopping by.